June 1944, D-Day. Thousands of Allied planes, ships and barges are on their way to reach the beaches of Normandy. Only this time they suddenly encounter German aircraft, never seen before. Little do they know, those are the modern Eurofighters, ready to meet them, and not in a friendly kind of way. Traveling through time and space, the modern-day Luftwaffe force decides to join the German side and defend France. Jets with guided bombs and missiles face piston-engined Allied planes. Would those be enough to change history? Would D-Day still be a success? Watch to find out. D-Day was one of the most complex military operations in history, and if you want to get the taste of how hard it would be to cross the English Channel and take France, you can try it in Call of War, a free-to-play online PvP strategy game sponsoring this video. In the game you choose a real country and lead it during World War II. Initial borders are historically accurate, but it is up to you to rewrite history, conquer lands, and then the whole world. You can play with the same account on PC and mobile devices, and Binko viewers are getting a special gift. Click the link in the video description to get 13,000 gold and 1 month of premium subscription for free. Don't lose time, choose your country and fight for world domination. The original D-Day was in some regards an inevitable success. The Allies landed roughly 3 times as many troops as Germany had in the immediate area, ready to oppose them. The Germans had some armor, but not much, as most of their armor was held away and spread out, with a plan to rush it to the coast once the true location of the invasion became known. Most of those tanks had to travel for a day under Allied air attacks to reach the battlefield. Germany had additional infantry divisions somewhat close, but being light on motorization, those took much longer to react. The Luftwaffe of the day was not up to the task of defending the French shores. The 3rd Air Fleet, tasked with defending the entire French and Belgian region, was severely understrength. Most German planes were either defending Germany or were fighting the Russians. One of the single biggest issues that beset the Germans on the real D-Day was the lack of early warning and recon in general. They could not have ships in the channel, and they could not maintain recon planes. The surprise of Allied landings was such that for the whole day the Germans did not realize just what they were facing in Normandy. They believed the attack they're getting reports of was just a small feint. So they held back both their air and ground reinforcements accordingly. Enter the time-traveling Luftwaffe. The entire modern-day German Luftwaffe travels through time and space, complete with their bases and infrastructure in Germany, which somehow managed to appear alongside existing infrastructure. They all arrive a few days prior to the invasion, and all somehow believe they must help Germany of 1944. The new German force, however, does manage to somehow lose all memory of history from June 44 onward. They do not know where and when the Allies will strike. They do know they are sent to protect France though. Still, it is knowledge through aerial recon that might help Germans of 1944. So the new Luftwaffe would start scouting right away. They would fly over the channel to see what kind of fleet Allies have, and watch the activity in air bases in southern England. That would cause the first set of changes in this alternate timeline. Germany's Tornado aircraft use recon pods. Most pods are old, film-based. Lengthy planning and post-mission analysis is required. Some use more modern Israeli pods. Those are smaller and can't see as far away, but they're electro-optical. Planes can send digital photos to the headquarters right away. The Allies would have it tough. World War II planes flew lower and slower. Anti-aircraft rounds would travel a full minute to reach their ceiling, and actually placing AA guns close enough for interceptions would require extreme luck. Calculating interceptions of those tornadoes would be basically impossible. The modern Luftwaffe also operates some Heron recon drones, but most of those drones would be very vulnerable on their own. Their service ceiling is reachable for the Allies. It's likely those would have to be accompanied by fighters. In a sense, they might serve as a lure. It's only the single bigger variant Heron which would be a potent, persistent surveillance platform. Scouting from afar, however, doesn't mean the Germans would have constant surveillance. While the drones might be less affected due to their long loiter times, regular fighters can't stay in the air nearly as long. When heavily laden with armaments, the figures shown are even smaller. Just getting to the battle theater and back might take some 2 hours. leaving an hour or two for a mission over Normandy. As the final preparations and force assembly are made on June 5th, Germany would likely notice an imminent threat. By the early hours of June 6th, the concentration and course of massive ship fleets and planes south of Britain would very much narrow the range of possible landing sites. All the German air forces and their army units would be on the move, reacting roughly a day earlier than they did in the real timeline. Once the air battles do begin, what would those actually look like? A nominal tally of the modern Luftwaffe's combat planes paints a fairly grim picture, paltry numbers. And available fighter rates would mean roughly half of those would be available for missions at any one day. Let's imagine the biggest wave cycle of 100 planes flying within a few hours, and a little over 300 sorties flown in total on June 6th. Such sortie rates are very hard to sustain though. Modern missiles are capable of tracking piston-engined UAVs, so they would have no issues with Allied planes, but there would be so many of them. Although keeping planes on patrol is very demanding on logistics, the Allies still managed to have 400 to 600 planes over Normandy at any given moment during the entire D-Day. If one assumes an 80% hit rate, 100 Luftwaffe jets might down nearly 500 Allied planes within 30 minutes, even if some chase was included. Guns might be used as well. Thanks to superior situational awareness and speed, Allied planes would pose almost no threat to Eurofighters, as long as turning fights are not attempted. Only some of the downed Allied planes would be fighters though. The Allies flew over 14,000 sorties on the real D-Day. Some aircraft were decoys, some were jammers, but most were fighters, transports and bombers. Some planes flew 2 sorties that day. When so many of their planes would disappear in such a short time frame, the Allies would be confused and scared. Many of the surviving planes would be called off, or they would simply flee. All that might happen a little after midnight, as June 6th starts. Earlier mass attacks by modern Luftwaffe aren't likely if the whole force got to 1944 just days before. The Allies would not really know what's happening, but they would notice periods when those fast blips on the radar screen are more present and when they're less present. The modern Luftwaffe does have anti-radar missiles. Those would get used against fixed radar sites and ships emitting signals. There are hundreds of radars out there, and roughly 10 of the 20 Tornado ECRs would be mission ready. Early anti-radar strikes could disrupt Allied situational awareness, but would not completely negate it. Sporadic usage of jamming to blind enemy radars would also happen. A few Tornado ECRs might fly with each wave, but they have only self-protection jammers of fairly short range. The old Luftwaffe would also help. With a day of extra warning, a few dozen additional fighters might come in, dealing with Allied probe attacks. The Allied air supremacy would be quite sporadic on June 6th, but such massive operations have inertia of their own. Simply stopping those thousands of ships and making them turn back would not be possible. Also, the first Allied paratroopers started landing on Normandy a little after midnight. There would be no going back. Allied warships would still target German coastal positions. But since pretty much the entire first wave of modern Luftwaffe was spent on air-to-air ops, there would be but a few attacks on the battleships. The real timeline saw the historic Luftwaffe do 100 sorties on D-Day. With more freedom, a few hundred sorties would be more likely. Modern Luftwaffe would have knowledge of the Allied fleet closing on the beaches. It would target ships as they start disembarking troops. But only part of its fleet is configured to use guided bombs. Laser guidance would be used when possible. Unguided bombs might be used against disembarked troops on beaches. But to use laser guidance, laser targeting pods would be needed. Those are rather scarce in numbers. Finally, the overall number of guided bombs is fairly small, as the modern Luftwaffe is not meant to do such missions in big numbers. It is likely almost all guided bombs would try to be expended on big item targets such as ships to inflict maximum damage. With one plane with a targeting pod lasing the targets for a few more planes, roughly half the jets might go ship hunting, with the other half engaging in air combat in that second wave. Laser guidance is far from perfect. Clouds, smoke screens and malfunctions would be an issue. Still, over 100 bombs might hit various Allied ships during the second attack wave. And there were a lot of ships used that day. They came in waves throughout the day. some 3,000 landing craft, boats, barges and ships to be more precise. Those actually touched the beach and directly unloaded troops or vehicles. Even without those, the Allies would have so many other ships, so even 200 direct hits during the day might not be enough. A big issue for the Allies would be having to deal with those ship hulks obstructing the beaches in ever greater numbers, further slowing down the influx of supplies and troops. But the modern Luftwaffe would again need to fly back and resupply. Allies would have a few hours of low Luftwaffe activity to deal with the situation on the beaches. A big threat for the Allies would also be the added German reinforcements on the ground, primarily the quicker-to-react panzer units. Allied air power, suppressed for a while, would once again rush to support their troops, even though by now they've lost roughly 1,000 various aircraft. We are at noon, D-Day ongoing. The old Luftwaffe would still struggle and be on the defensive. In the real timeline, Germany had some 20-ish fortifications near Normandy beaches with roughly 100 guns in total. Large field artillery tubes were less present due to their vulnerability and slow relocation speed. But in the new timeline, if 2 to 3 panzer divisions managed to reach the beaches, even if piecemeal, they could double the overall gun figures, those compared to 1 additional division later in the day in the real timeline. Tanks and assault guns are more susceptible to damage than fixed sites, but they would get targeted far less as their location changes. And historic examples of tactical air attacks on individual vehicles show abysmal success rates. The Germans would be able to locally put more tubes shooting at those landing craft and pinning down the infantry. The whole D-Day would certainly be bloodier for the Allies. With less air support pinning down the Germans, a slower influx of Allied troops on the beaches, fewer paratroopers landed and possibly double the German firepower pinning down the Allies. It's plausible every beach would end like Omaha Beach. The modern Luftwaffe would trickle into a third wave of attacks sometime in the afternoon, possibly doing similar damage to the previous wave. But the Allies might also learn, at least in tiny part, how to expose themselves less to such attacks. If doing similar damage as in the previous wave, some 1,300 aircraft would be neutralized by then, out of 11,000 available to the Allies. If roughly half the guided bombs hit, that's still fewer than 200 ships hit. That being said, during those D-Day attack waves, the Allies would likely lose over 10,000 personnel on ships, mostly army troops, with a similar number neutralized, having had to be rescued from the sea. While some of the modern Luftwaffe planes might attempt even a 4th sortie that day, maintenance issues would preclude that option for the rest. Planes do need hours to get checked and prepped between missions, and the more they fly, the more maintenance hours they need. Additional ships would be arriving, including various cargo ships like the Liberty class. They would use small ports or simply unload near the beach, though that would mean they could not be fully loaded. Those large cargo ships would become primary targets as soon as they try to approach the beachheads, which, given everything, might be delayed. Supplies coming to the Allied troops would be severely disrupted. But now we're already talking about June 7th, not D-Day. What would happen in those coming days would be this. The modern Luftwaffe would be rotating their planes in and out of maintenance the best it can, trying to upkeep another 200 or so sorties on each of the following days. The Allies would still be losing a lot of planes. They would try to evade the modern jets where they can, so not all Luftwaffe missiles would be expended on all missions. Still, a few hundred planes per day would be lost for a few more days until the Luftwaffe gets low on missiles. And over 300 guided bombs would be dropped per day. Most of those, again, targeting big cargo ships, possibly even some of the cruisers and battleships if there's a lack of a better target. Even so, the accumulation of troops on Normandy beaches would continue. Instead of having 152,000 troops on the beaches at the start of the second day, they would have maybe 100,000 or so effective soldiers, facing some 80,000 Germans, with those additional panzer divisions present. Further days in the real timeline did not deliver as many troops. Once troops disembark, they need constant supplies. So the ensuing days saw Allied transports devote less and less capacity to additional troops and more to supplies and heavy equipment. Those tables of troops and supplies would be quite a bit different in the alternate timeline. With the Allies losing almost 200 medium and large ships per day for several days in a row, their transport capacity would get seriously compromised, and the artificial harbors would likely never see the light of the day. In the real timeline, the Allies used 400 concrete slabs to create makeshift piers. Those allowed more tonnage to be offloaded than by beaches. Just how many bombs would the modern Luftwaffe spend on those piers is hard to say. They would not be able to know that one of the harbors would soon be lost anyway, due to a storm. It's quite likely the modern Luftwaffe would use unguided bombs as well, for some targets. With fighters providing cover, some planes could likely afford to fly at medium altitudes and try to hit something with dumb bombs. The old Luftwaffe would join the bombing as well. Unguided bomb accuracy would likely be terrible, but against a very high concentration of equipment and personnel on the beaches, or against those concrete harbor slabs, they might be somewhat effective. The modern Luftwaffe also operates quite a few helicopters. The heavy Super Stallion helicopters would likely ferry Wehrmacht troops, trying to move as many reinforcements closer to the beachheads. Some helicopters, like attack ones, are operated by the Bundeswehr. Those did not time travel. Transport planes would also help bring more reinforcements more quickly. The modern Luftwaffe also operates some SAMs. Most Patriot batteries would most likely be kept in Germany to defend from possible Allied bomber strikes. But the best initial defense for those modern-day Luftwaffe air bases would be the fact that the Allies would take at least days to figure out those exist and where they are. Which also means that within a week from D-Day, the Germans might have to keep most of their fighters in Germany, defending those crucial air bases. SAMs would not be up to the long-term defense task alone, as they simply lack missile numbers. The spike in losses for Allied bombers over Germany would be horrific, but it would be temporary. The Weasel units with short-range SAMs would be flown into Normandy by transport planes right away. But again, overall missile numbers available are likely low, possibly just in the hundreds. That issue of not enough modern guided armaments would be more and more exposed as the days would drag on. By the third day, going at the described pace, the Luftwaffe might very well be out of air-to-air missiles, and by the fifth day, possibly out of their entire stock of guided bombs. The big issue would be the availability of the fleet. Such crazy sortie rates are not something today's Luftwaffe is accustomed to. Planes need spare parts, and stocks of those are not that big in peacetime. The modern Luftwaffe would very soon fall to just 100 combat jet sorties per day, and then keep falling further in the coming weeks as the fleet is cannibalized to keep at least some of the planes flying. Of course, by then, by the second or even the third week, the damage to the Allies would already be done. Grave damage. Instead of a decisive victory achieved in the real timeline, the Allies would be stuck near the beach. The Germans would be out of heavy firepower, unable to drive them into the sea. But the Allies would also be out of numbers, with compromised artillery and air support. They would also be suffering from serious supply issues, perhaps lacking some ammo. In the real timeline, the Allies managed to encircle and capture many German units in a quick breakout, before significant reinforcements came. In the alternate timeline, a lot of Germans would be dug around Normandy, and breaking out would go much more slowly. The Allies might be stuck near the beaches for at least a month. And all those sunk ships and fewer troops and tanks and supplies delivered would aggregate over time to a completely different picture within a month or two. Especially considering much of the Allied air power, one of their biggest advantages, would be very bruised. They would lose some 3,000 various aircraft over Normandy just to the modern Luftwaffe alone, a quarter of the overall Allied air power designated for Normandy campaign. Still, aircraft production was such that the air losses could be replaced fairly quickly, in mere weeks. Allied warships would still very much batter the German positions though. Larger ones might be neutralized, but there will be 100 destroyers likely left. The Allies would notice the mystery fighter jets fly less and less, and that their weapons don't hit precisely anymore. Eventually, they would regain momentum and control of the air, and press on. They would still be starting from a front line that's basically one from the 7th day of the real timeline, but precious time would have been lost. And even though the modern Luftwaffe wouldn't fly much anymore, the crucial aerial recon missions could still be flown, giving Germans timely warnings on Allied offensives. Collapse of the German front in France might come months, if not half a year later than in the real timeline, with an eventual push towards Berlin being even slower, due to overall aggregation of losses and effects mentioned in this scenario. The modern Luftwaffe would not be able to win the war for Germany, nor save Normandy, nor even completely ruin Allied efforts on D-Day itself, but its effects would still be huge, possibly even influencing the course of the Cold War to come years later. Before we go, a few more words about Call of War. That player versus player environment can be pretty demanding, so choose your strategy carefully. Forge alliances with other players when you need to. You play with up to 100 other players in real time, and the game features such a detailed map that it can take weeks to complete. Call of War is not about rushing, rather you shepherd your country and direct your army several times a day. Routing and timing your attacks correctly can be vital. There are dozens of units to explore, just look at all these infantry options. And watch out for your economy, even the strongest army still needs the raw materials and food. Don't say I didn't warn you. And definitely double down on research. Imagine someone else getting the nuclear bomb before you do it. Don't forget that special offer. Click the link below to get 13,000 gold and 1 month of premium subscription for free. Mind you, the offer is valid for 30 days only. Hurry up and fight your way to victory. And remember, Binkov may talk about hypothetical wars, but only real peace can bring us all together.